We have Jamie Mustard back. He's an award-winning author who wrote the book Child X. We had him on for an earlier interview, and we got quite a few comments and also questions. We have him back, and we're going to go more in depth into his book and his childhood, but we also go into his time when he was working in Scientology as a teenager and how he actually finally escaped. And I think you're going to find this interesting and hopefully informative. Here's Jamie Mustard. Hello, everybody. Welcome again to our channel, Scientology, Peeling the Onion. My name is Mark Fisher, and here is my co-host, Janis Gillham Grady. How you doing, Janis?
Good, Mark. Good day, everyone, and welcome to Scientology, Peeling the Onion. Hey, the other day we released an interview where we had a conversation with Jamie Mustard, and we got a lot of comments on that, and it was a real serious and good conversation. So you know what? We're going to do it again. We have Jamie back with us.
Okay. Without further ado, he's an award-winning author, and this is his latest book here, which is Child X. And we're going to discuss that some more, and also about his time in Scientology and this organization. But without further ado, let me bring on Jamie Mustard. Hi, Jamie. Hey. How you doing?
Good. Here we are. I thought I didn't think you guys would air the first episode, let alone have you back.
No.
I'm enjoying this.
Yeah, it is fun.
I'm a glutton for punishment, but
yeah. But one of the things you mentioned, right before we went on the air is we have a different audience, I think, than other channels, and we have a mixture of former Scientologists, former Sea Org members, people who are under the radar still in Scientology, people who are never-ins, and also people who are independent. Yeah, and then people who are independent, who are still practicing Hubbard's techniques and things like that. So we get a mixture of everything. And so, it can be a little bit, your story might be eye-opening to some of those people. Let's put it that way. And then there's other maybe who know your story. So that's why we wanted to have you on and let you share your views.
Yeah, there were, I didn't read too many, but there was one guy that said, I was in the Sea Org for 22 years. And I never saw these conditions. I've seen this guy before. He's full of BS. And I laughed when I just thought it was so funny because Robert Dam's book is about that. And I have a close friend that grew up in the dormitories in Copenhagen, and the conditions are identical. Like we're the invisible children of somehow we have invisibility cloaks, And so but it made me think when I read the comment, I thought the guy might be still like an independent member.
Right.
Exactly. And then, of course, I had somebody come after me, too, which I welcome. I have no problem with that. But I kept saying, hey, listen, if you've got some story or something you want to tell, please come on if you want. Or if not, if you want to remain anonymous, that's fine, too. But they just kept coming after me. And I just kept saying over again, look, come on, tell your story. We have an open forum here. If you want to attack me, you can do it. You know what I mean? Come on, And so we'll see if that ever happens.
For those that are watching, an independent Scientologist is somebody that doesn't believe in this corporate structure of Scientology, but practices Hubbard's techniques outside of the corporate church.
And we don't judge. We don't judge that because they're, people are free to believe whatever they want. They can be Muslim, they can be Catholic, they could be born again Christian, they can be whatever they want. We just don't want people hurting and abusing people. That's the bad side. That's what we're trying to expose as well. But we're more than willing to share people's wins or their successes and whatever they're doing.
Well, it wasn't.
I want to bring up. I want to bring up another one of those comments, and that was where I told the story of some guy who slept with an underage girl, and Mary Sue holding a knife at his throat and telling him to get off the ship. And someone made a comment about that, about how that should never have happened, and it's And as a 13-year-old, seeing and hearing that happen, I felt protection. I didn't feel that woman, that Mary Sue, was in the wrong. She was protecting the kids. is how I viewed it.
And you guys were also in a developing country with a fair, in the 70s or late 60s, with a fair amount of lawlessness. And listen, I said something that wasn't totally true in the last episode, so I want to correct the record on something that I said that was false. Is I said that it's a felony to not report a felony in California, and that's not necessarily true. It really depends on the felony, what the level of violence, and most often it is a misdemeanor, which is still a crime. Okay, but it's not a felony. Okay, so I want to say that.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay, but I wanted to make it clear. I felt protected because of that action.
Listen,
that there was someone looking out for us.
You were a minor in a developing country.
Yes.
And I don't know what else. And it was the 1960s. You can't look back at the 1960s by 2025 standards.
Right? Exactly. Right.
Yeah, I mean, that was like, they didn't have seatbelts back then. They were paddling kids. Like, it was a different time. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
So I think that I applaud Mary Sue and her actions for that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we enjoyed the last show, and we want to carry on. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, get into is, I mean, obviously, you know, your book, Child X, covers, I'm reading it now, so I haven't read the whole thing yet, but it covers your time in the nursery, which you call the baby factory, and all that in the slum in California or Los Angeles. But I wanted to ask you about your time, because you stayed into you, 18, 19 years old in this.
That's not totally true. You know, I mean, I wasn't
necessarily. Well, my point is, I don't know anything about your history in the Sea Org. So if you could tell us a little bit about that, would be great.
I signed my first Sea Org contract at this building on Melrose before the complex when I was 5. Mm-hmm. Before they had the big blue, what we now know as the big blue building, but when we moved into it, it was a big tan or cream building. I think you have a picture of it, Bart.
Yeah,
I do.
Yeah, that's what it looked like when we moved in. When I was a little kid.
Cedars of Lebanon Hospital.
Yeah. I don't know how quickly they painted it. I think it was fairly quickly. I'm trying to remember if they painted it yet during the FBI raid that I was in. But anyway, so I signed, you know, you're a kid, you believe in the Easter Bunny, you believe in Santa Claus, and you don't know how to write, you're not in school, you don't have any, like, you know, you mentioned to me, I'm reading the first few chapters of this book and you're getting sick, and where are your parents? Good question. I didn't have any parents. I mean, listen, did they ever come visit me in these dormitories?
Yeah.
Yes, they did. But were they looking at my body? Were they bathing me? Were they showering me? No, they weren't. So, you know, I had some severe life and death experiences, near-death experiences, because nobody was looking at my body. And so things would get out of control. I would go on a trip every 2 years to see a relative. They would inspect me, and then it was off to the emergency room. That happened one time to the emergency room where I was septic, and then another time where I almost lost my hearing.
Right.
Right.
Both of those happened before we moved into the complex.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I've started reading the book, and was your mom a single mom when you were born? Because you talk about a dad when you were 3.
Listen, I don't want to give the book away because you guys are reading it.
Okay.
But you know, there's, you know, my mother was married to a guy named John Mustard. Okay. My mother's not the most honest person in the world. So this is all covered in the book. I'm going to give a cliffhanger. There is controversy, which is explained in the book, about who my father is and is the person on my birth certificate my father.
I see.
Okay.
Because this was lied about and this stuff was falsified. It's all explained in the book how it happened and why it happened. But yes, my mother, upon my birth, was married to John Mustard.
Okay.
Got it.
Yeah.
And John Mustard he's had quite a few wives and has maybe 5 kids?
I don't know. In terms of biological children, I think he has 2, but he had a lot of stepkids. You know, he had 2 stepkids with Sue Rawlings. He had 2 stepkids with Caroline Mustard, who was there with Mark. Mark probably knows her from Gillham Hot Springs.
I don't.
Janis.
Janis. Okay.
Carolyn actually went on a cruise with me along with one of your brothers, I think, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, he and I kind of don't talk much, but I'm very close with Josh's brother, and I spent Thanksgiving with Caroline this last year.
Okay.
Good.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, so you joined the Sea Org at 5.
Yeah. So like back then, it was different. Like it was like everything was a lot more loosey goosey. When, I'm a kid when Hubbard's kind of moving to Florida, but the first few years of my life, he's still on the Apollo on the boat.
Right.
Janis is a little girl serving him, putting out, holding his ashtray, or whatever they were doing.
Being a slave, a real slave.
Being a slave. And listen, one of the reasons I don't want to give the thing about my father away in the book is there's a whole kind of like, it's like right out of Star Wars. It's a whole kind of Darth Vader, Luke. It's like Luke Skywalker finding out his dad is Darth Vader. Like there's a whole sequence in this book that's explained, and I just don't want to give it away to the audience because it's unbelievable when you read it. It's hard for me to read it. It's hard for me to read it and believe it. And it happened.
Can I make a comment on the book so far? Because I'm only 4 chapters in, but your style it's to the viewers out there who haven't read Child X, right? I mean, it's not like a time, place, form, and event. Here's my story. I mean, it's very creatively written, beautiful words and pictures. You paint a picture of like the desert in Mexico or like the clothes that people are wearing and all that, which novelists do that and all that. And I'm not used to reading books like that about people that were in Scientology, you know what I mean? So it's a different style and it's very enjoyable to read.
I really appreciate that. Normally with a quote memoir, a person is doing their reflective thoughts. Okay. Mm-hmm. This is like the first, half of my life, this story. And I didn't have any reflective thoughts. I was numb.
Right.
But from all the trauma. So I thought the right way, what I wanted people to do is I wanted them to experience what it would be like to be born inside a Sea Org slum as a child. What does that feel like? Forget what goes, like, I'm not thinking anything. I'm a deer caught in the head. I am just a ball of pain. Okay. So all I could do was describe the physical environment. And because it's so brutal, I thought maybe if I can describe the physical environment in a very beautiful way, it'll help you deal with watching what's happening to this child. When my publisher first asked me if I would write about it, I said, no, absolutely not. Probably not. I don't think you even could write about something like that. And he said, why not? And I said, nobody wants to read a book watching a kitten get strangled for 300 pages. That's my childhood. Okay.
Right.
And so you have to understand, like, one of the things I do in the book is I don't use any of the terms that Hubbard uses. Right. Like he has a lot of fancy terms for gross things. Like he'll call it the cadet org, but really it is a child abuse, like not up to code slum building. Like there's a building called the Apollo Training Academy across from the Big Blue building that is a very dangerous building for children. We played on a dirt patch in the back. We played exposed to the sun, cracked linoleum, exposed concrete, jutting metal everywhere. Okay. A lot of injuries in that building. We never went. It was supposedly a school. We were warehoused in there like animals. So when you call it the Apollo Training Academy, you're getting this very fancy falsified word where there's really brutality going on to children. So so I stripped away all the language in the book and I tell you what things actually are, not what Hubbard says they are.
Yeah, but I like that you go like the unwashed, cigarette smelling clothing and uniforms. Describe everything smells like cigarette. I never smoked,
It was the 70s.
Oh my God, you'd walk into these rooms and a cloud of smoke would come out. It was terrible.
It was the 70s, and all the Sea Org members had like yellow shirts from smoking, and they worked 7 days a week, so they couldn't do laundry. Like it was a paramilitary, but it was kind of a dirty, flea bag. Dirty,
that's what I'm trying to say is that you describe it well. You don't just go time, place, form, and event. You describe the colors, the sensations, the smells. It's very interesting.
Jamie, I tried when I'm reading yours. I think of my books that I've written, and I've just written my books where it's like blah. Here's what happened. Form your own opinion. Where you add so much color and life in what you're describing. Flavor, where mine is more, here's the timeline of what happened.
I think because I was there from literally the day of my birth. I mean, people can't imagine this,
Yeah.
right? And I don't know a lot of people that were there as babies. Like they went from the hospital to a slum dorm in downtown LA, right? So what I wanted to do was I don't really feel like the story of the Sea Org children or the paramilitary children has ever been told. And I thought the best way to tell that story would be to try to help. I wanted the audience to experience it. I don't want to tell you what's happening. I want you to experience with this child, with me, what is happening. Because I thought that would be the most effective way for us to be believed, because I still feel like we're not believed.
Right.
The kids that grew up in the religious paramilitary, Hubbard's religious paramilitary, I believe to this day, people do not understand it was a system. The Aftermath TV show did an astonishing job telling the stories. And all of these kids, I know a lot of them. They're in their 40s and 50s now. They're aging out. But it's like what they didn't explain is that this was a system, and it was thousands of kids from the late 60s, to the early 90s, and 30, 35 years that it occurred on 4 continents. And this was systematically, children were being ground through this machine where they were being, we were animalized. I didn't have underwear. I didn't learn to brush my teeth ever.
Right.
I didn't have bed sheets. I didn't have a towel. And I was uneducated to the point where I could read at a high level from studying Hubbard's doctrine. But at 19, which was my first escape, I could not write. I didn't know how to use a comma, a paragraph, a period. I could scratch out characters. I was going to
ask you about that. You couldn't write, but did you use a computer at all? Were you ever taught how to type?
I learned when we moved to Oregon for a couple of years when I was 13, and I took a typing class. So I had kind of some typing ability from that typing class. It was the only thing. I got pretty much straight F's in high school because I was so far behind at that point. I couldn't turn in a paper, but I did learn the QWERTY keyboard in a typing class, but I didn't really have the opportunity to type after that. So
it's different than handwriting.
I'll tell you, there was
a skill you got to have. Yeah.
There was a 14-year-old Mexican kid named Nacho that worked in the ship office with me at the Sandcastle Hotel in Central Florida, in Clearwater, Florida. He was the administrative assistant. He didn't speak English, Nacho. Because I couldn't write and I would do all these scratches, this Mexican 14-year-old kid that couldn't speak English would have to rewrite all of my invoices. It really is true that I could not write. It's not something I'm saying. Yeah. So no, I didn't have really access to computers or a typewriter back then. So no, I didn't. I did find years later when I got a word processor after I escaped, that I had kind of remembered the QWERTY. So as I started off going to a community college, taking remedial classes for kids that were way behind. And I tried to work within the QWERTY system because I thought, gosh, if I get any better at this, I want to be able to write. So, I couldn't handwrite. So the only thing I had was typing once I started to try to figure out how to write.
I got it. So anyway, so carry on with what you.
Okay, so everything was loosey goosey back then. So they're like, we were kids, and we had little uniforms, but we were really largely neglected and just being warehoused. There was no AC, just in this hot box on Melrose and Van Ness. And so this idea of when you say the Sea Org, right? Or the Cadet Org, you get this idea of this formal institution that's being run a certain way. And it wasn't like that back then. It was it got more like that under Dave, but it was just kind of an S-hole of child neglect and child abuse. And everything was kind of dirty and unorganized. It wasn't like you were in this thing. So to talk about it, when were you in the SO? Well, I'm just trying to talk to our audience. No, I know. So I'm just trying to say, at one point, I started doing more and more child labor once we moved to the Big Blue Building, what we call the complex on Sunset in LA, in East Hollywood. And that they started to give me jobs. I worked as a page where I ran folders, folders where you have your million-year-old past lives from the archives underneath what is now the publications, the Bridge Publications building, from back and forth between where the people got their counseling on the machine.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. I just remembered that. It was the crawl space underneath that pub's building at the complex. I remember having to crawl under there to try and find folders, pre-clear auditing folders under there in 1978. I remember that.
Yeah. I mean, they kind of fixed it up and they turned it into this vast archives. And there was not everybody knows this, but there's tunnels that run from the buildings on one side of the street to the others. Yeah. And so there was a tunnel there. There was a guy, this black guy that ran this giant archives had tens of thousands of folders. It was vast. I mean, it was probably the size of half the football field. Yeah. And all the folders were there. And, where people would, their past lives and all their transgressions were written up. And my job was at 9 years old, I wasn't in school, they would send me with a piece of paper to run to the guy that ran the archives to get this ancient folder, and he would go look it up and hand it to me, and I would run up this confidential folder to the people that were doing the counseling. And that was one of the first child labor jobs I had. I did some pretty brutal child labor. They had me working on the renovations of cleaning the place when I was a kid, and they did some pretty cruel things to me at 7, 8, 9 years old in terms of the child labor, which is in the book. But there were different sides. Like one time I'd just be warehoused at this building called the Apollo Training Academy, which was a slum office building that was very dangerous, where we were just out exposed to the sun or in the building, no AC. No school. Another time I would be working, where they were doing the counseling, and then maybe they'd leave me alone for 6 months or a year, and I would just languish. My thing was by the time I was 7 years old, I was taking the bus in Hollywood by myself. And I realized there were periods where I'd be left alone for 6 months. I would just fall between the cracks. And what I would do is I'm going to get up. Can I get off an overt on you, Janis? Sure. I have an overt on your father. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to get off an overt. I'm going to get, which is a transgression in Hubbard's dream. We call it an overt. So one of the things I would do to make money to go to the movies when I was 8 years old was Peter Gillham's would pay me to pass out flyers. All I needed was $10, and I could take the bus to the Egyptian. I'd have enough money for a popcorn and a Coke, and because I'd be going to the matinee, I could stay in that movie theater and watch movies all day. Yeah. So I didn't need a lot of money, but that was a lot of flyers. I think they were paying me 20 cents a flyer. So
are you talking about for his vitamin store?
Yeah. Peter Gillham's would pay me her dad's vitamin store, and your dad worked there back then. I would see him. He worked up in the office, and he would pay me 2 cents a flyer. So how much is $10? That was the minimum I needed to go watch the movies. So there were times where I sat and passed out, I don't know, 2,000 flyers. I did do that. Okay. But there were also times where I took the 2,000 flyers, dumped them in the trash.
Into the circular file?
Yeah, into the circular file. Went to play video games, arcade games, for 3 hours with quarters that I stole from the Asho canteen. And then went back to Peter Gillham's and said, "Flyers all passed out." Okay. So over the years, I definitely stole a few bucks from your dad. So I'm kidding.
Well, it's funny you mentioned. Go ahead, Janis.
Yeah, well, Jamie, I need you to make up the damage, and you need to go pass out some flyers for me.
Oh no! Yeah.
Jamie, it's funny though you mentioned the movie theaters, because in 1978 I was at the now it's the Test Center on Hollywood Boulevard. Mm-hmm. I was getting through some auditing that I had needed before they would send me to Clearwater, and we got paid $5 a week or something like that. But on Saturdays we got the day off, and we would go to the World Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, and you could see 3 movies for like $1, and popcorn was like 25 cents. So like you said, I would go and we would pay the $1 or $2 or whatever it was, and we'd sit there and watch movies all day.
It was crazy. I mean, I talk about it in the book. There was a male prostitute on Hollywood and Vine that I developed a friendship with. Black guy. And when I was short on money, he would give me money. I mean, he protected me. It was very interesting. I talk about it. You'll read about it in the book, but I talk about all the people where I came so close to that. I mean, there's 5 near-death experiences in that book. I mean, really bad. And right when I'm at the brink, somebody steps in and does a kind act. And I call these people in the book, I call them angels, because I don't know how I would have survived. And I've lost so many friends. You know, I talked about that on the last show, of just how many friends. I mean, one of the things that a girl called me last night, I don't know that she wants me to say her name, so I won't, but we were talking about it beforehand. But we were just talking about all the kids that aren't around anymore that we grew up with.
Yeah.
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 And
there's a lot of them.
Yeah. And so, you know, one of the things that has been, you know, a subject of exceeding debate, and why I wrote this book, because I was like living a double life in a way. Like my agents, my publisher, my speaking, no one knew. I felt really embarrassed that I was associated with this kind of sci-fi love boat thing. And it was only when I wanted to promote my trauma book that I thought I'd better call my publisher and tell him I'm going to do an interview on Hubbardism, or, you know, I even hate to call it Scientology. I don't even think Scientology is a real thing. I see a lot of other shows, and I know you have Scientologists that watch the show in independence, but my view of Scientology is that it's just a bunch of crap stirred in a pot, you know, like a bunch of urine and feces and maggots stirred in a pot and regurgitated and organized. I don't have it wasn't a religious experience for me. Let's just say that.
Right.
Briefly, I wanted to ask you, did you ever get any Scientology auditing on the bridge or anything like that?
Yes. Yes. And I detail this in the book. I didn't go far up Hubbard's ladder to people don't need to understand that the whole goal of Scientology is that you go up this ladder of asking questions on these cans, which is kind of like a lie detector and can kind of help you read your thoughts or your past lives before you can. That helps you, that supposedly, and when you believe in it, it kind of does, right? You'll invent stuff. It kind of induces a hypnotic state. It induces dopamine. And so I didn't do a ton of it, but I did a test to past life clear, which I talk about extensively in the book, when I'm 9 years old. But I didn't go up much of the ladder beyond that. And I never did a ton of that stuff. I did a lot of I probably did more interrogations on the lie detector.
Security checks.
Or what I call them interrogations, but sec checks.
Yeah. They are interrogations. No, you have it right, but yeah.
Okay. But they're basically interrogations on like on a lie detector. Okay.
Right.
And I did that, probably more of that than anything else. But you know, what people don't understand is the whole point of Hubbard's processes, slimetology, I call it diuretics and slimetology, is that you go through these processes and you go up what's kind of like a ladder. And the whole point is that eventually you will shed your body. You will no longer, we're all fallen gods on a prison planet in a body, and the meat body is a prison. And the whole point is to get enlightened enough that you don't need the meat body anymore. And that always confused me as a kid, because, you know, I liked pizza. You know, there were things that I liked. I mean, we did, you know, there were, you know, and I was like, just one really, you know, like floating around in space without a body. I never really understood the appeal of that. You know, it sounds kind of boring. But that's the goal of Hubbard's processes, is to float around in space without a body and do stuff like a god. And so I didn't do a ton of it, but I was told at a very young age, you know, they started telling me at 3 years old that I was a trillion-year-old fallen god in a baby body, that I had lived a billion lifetimes before, and that I was expected to act like a fully grown adult. This was the expectation put on me. And I do think, when I look back at what I consider to be child abuse, I think the expectation of acting like an adult, everything in Hubbard's fever dream, Scientology, whatever you want to call it, his practices, his doctrines, is about shame and guilt, right? So if something good happened to you, it's because the doctrine worked. If something bad happened to you, it's because you, quote, pulled it in. It's your karma. So if a kid was born with a birth defect, it was his fault because he did something in a past life. So everything is your fault. And I don't think adult Scientology, what you would call a Scientologist, people that built this thing in the 70s and 80s. You guys are not part of that group. You guys were teenagers or younger. I don't think people understand what being told that everything is your fault does to a developing brain. And I mean, there's a lot of other things, from the no blink training drills where you have to stare at somebody for 2 hours without blinking. I mean, this is grooming. They're grooming you to pay attention to the body. But I think also there was a thing where we weren't allowed to express any sort of emotion. If you're 3 years old, if you're 5 years old, if you're 6 years old, if you're 7 years old, you're going to get upset. You're going to cry. That was forbidden. The minute you start to cry, a person would run over and say, knock off the bank, which meant stop being you're in your reactive part of your mind, which is not present. So you were told that whatever hurt you wasn't really happening to you. So they're gaslighting you at 4. And then the last thing I'll say is they would say, knock off the human emotion and reaction. So any sort of emotion that was anger, upset, grief, crying was forbidden. So at 4 years old, you don't have parents. You're experiencing all of this physical child abuse. You're experiencing all of this mental child abuse, and you're not allowed to be emotional. I think that's like taking an ice scraper to a child's brain. I don't think a child can recover from that. And I think that's why so many of my friends have decided to, unalive themselves, or have overdosed, or, had, from alcohol or drugs.
Right. Right. And and the term that was always used on me was stop being banky.
Okay. But what does that mean? Can one of you guys define that?
Well, the bank is where you have all your reactive mind reactions. And so by you having human emotions and showing them, you're being banky. It's coming from your bank.
Yeah, and it's like, and Janis has told the story about when her mother died, and Hubbard basically, Janis is having to type a letter to Mary Sue that LRH is dictating about Yvonne passing away, and Janis is crying, and she's like, I have to stop this because you can't show human emotion and reaction on losing your mother,
Right.
How old were you when your mom passed away?
21. Okay,
so she was running the Artist Center, which they call Celebrity Center, in the 70s, right? She was the boss.
Yeah, she started it in 69. And in 77, the Guardian's office did an evaluation. Well, no, Harriet Foster did the evaluation off of Guardian's office data reports. And basically, she was removed. And Hubbard then came up with the commanding officer and the president that there should be 2 different jobs. And she was then made to set up the PR org to get celebrities into Celebrity Center.
Yvonne is a complicated person, because you could say she was maybe one of the kindest leaders and most compassionate and heartfelt leaders in the history of Hubbard's movement. And because of that, she did more damage than almost anyone in the history of the movement in this way. People thought that what Yvonne was doing at this Celebrity Center, the Artist Center, where Travolta started in the early 70s. Okay. Like Travolta came into Scientology at the Celebrity Center under Yvonne Gents. And so I would argue that if Janis's mom wasn't this special person that was kind of altering Scientology into this hyper kind, compassionate, loving thing, which is not what it was. Yvonne kind of had her own sauce, or her own way of doing it, which made it seem a lot kinder and compassionate than it was. One could argue that Travolta would have never gotten in, because the minute she was gone, it was never like that again.
Right. And I agree with you, Jamie. And my mother was already like that. Growing up, she was a compassionate person. The stories that I've heard from family and friends, she was always deeply loved by everyone but her own mother, who would shoe polish her face so that she couldn't go to a party or a ball or whatever. Anyway, but she and my dad got her out of Brisbane and moved to Melbourne to get her away from the suppression of her mother.
Okay.
But but she helped people. She loved to help people, and it
Wasn't
was
she a
through her
kindergarten teacher
love.
too? Wasn't she a teacher?
Yeah, she was a kindergarten director. Yeah.
I just think that the whole history of artists because they had big stars getting in, back at that time, and the whole history of this movement would have been very different if they had a normal person that was actually administrating Hubbard's version of this stuff, which was very draconian and abusive. And Havon was kind of changing it and turning it into this kind of soft, kind, loving thing. And I think that gave people a very false impression, and it grew it faster than it should have,
Right.
Well, she grew up in
different than the regular public. Celebrities, they had carte blanche. They had the red carpet rolled out for them. Whatever they wanted, they got. And that's Tom Cruise, which I was around when he came and met Miscavige the first time. You name it. It was like, whatever they want, we want them in this Scientology.
But that was a different era too. She grew up in high society Brisbane. Both her great grandfathers were Supreme Court judges. Her uncles were all like attorneys and judges and prosecutors, and all part of the connection to the Supreme Court. And she knew the governor and all that kind of stuff. That's what she grew up in.
And for people that don't understand, outside of Hubbard, there's only 3 or 4 people in the history of this group that almost have a royalty status because of where they were in the growth of the movement. And one could say David Gaiman, who is a technical person. No, not David Gaiman. Sorry, David Mayo, who is a technical person that worked under Hubbard. He almost has a legendary status. But what I want people to understand is that when we're talking this inside baseball about Janis's mom, and why it's important is that in the history of this thing, the most revered person in the history of this movement, outside of Hubbard, the person where if you talk about people that were at the Artist Center in the 70s with the so-called Celebrity Center, where the mission was to get big stars in, the most revered person that wasn't L. Ron Hubbard, even more than Mary Sue, in the history of, I don't want to call it a religion, and I don't want to call it Scientology, in the religion, in the history of this movement, this barbaric movement, the most revered person outside of Hubbard was this woman named Yvonne Gentz, who ran the Artist Center for many years, started the Artist Center, and she has this reputation that is just one notch below Hubbard. If you're inside this thing, she has this kind of legendary status, and she built the Artist Center that brought in John Travolta and all the, and you could say Isaac Hayes and Priscilla Presley and Peter Schlett and a million other stars that came.
Chick Corea,
and that was built through, that was started. I think your mother even had the idea for it, right? Or no?
Yes, it was her idea, and she wrote Hubbard saying she wanted to do it.
Okay, and so when I was a kid, they have this Gothic hotel that Yvonne built this thing out of, this beautiful building on Franklin and Bronson, right at the base of Griffith Park. And they had an annex building where the Rose Garden Pavilion is now, and that was now where they kept the kids. First, it was the AO, and then when we moved with the Advanced Institute, and then when we moved to the big blue building, and the counseling moved from there to the big blue building, and that annex, which was looked like a rundown dental office with a dirt patch behind it, that became the new area for child abuse. That became the quote cadet ward. And so I grew up in the shadow of being abused 100 yards, 50 yards from where your mom was doing this kind of humane, kinder form of this thing that was giving people a very false impression of what it is. So there's all of these contradictions that I talk about.
Plus the Guardian's office was in the Manor Hotel too at the same time, just so you know.
Yes, at that time, because I know my mom died, the raid was in July 77.
Yeah.
She died in January 78. And around that time, I went down to LA to gather some of her personal items from her office. And her office for the PR org was in the Manor. Celebrity Center was still over at La Brea. And the Guardian's office was upstairs. And you're right, the cadet org, the kids, the nursery was in the annex.
Yeah, so I grew up seeing your mom every day because I was over there all the time. Yeah. And she was always had a smile on her face. She had a different energy. But the guys inside that building 50 yards away from her were doing things physically to me and mentally to me that should never be done to a child. And
Right.
like I remember, I don't know, conversations with this guy, Ken Purak, the things he said to me that I now think, God, I was 7 years old when he said those things to me. I mean, what a cruel man. I don't know what he's like now, but he said said some really disgusting, evil things to me that could have broke me for the rest of my life. And 50 yards from where your mom was doing kindnesses. One of the things so the whole point is that when I was 16, we went to Oregon for 3 years, 2.5 years. I came back, I was illiterate, and I was kind of floating around. Debbie Mace let me go to her school in exchange for working for her, the Mace Kingsley School. And I just was looking I was going to go into a life of child labor hard labor. And one of my friends convinced me at 17, a friend of mine convinced me at 17 to go back into the paramilitary formally. So the only time I ever did it formally was at 17. The other times were complete child manipulation, but it was still, I was illiterate at 17. I couldn't write. I'd never been to school. I only knew this thing, and I was going to have to do child labor jobs. So and that was, I think, the point, ultimately, Scientology, as you want to call it, Slimetology, Hubbardism, it is a slave labor system that is, especially with the children, because they don't know any different, right? That is, like if you're 18 and you're recruited from UC Davis, you still have a childhood of some kind, and you still have some sort of meta intelligence of the world, right? But as children, we had a different experience. What we experienced as children was different than the 18-year-old. It was more.
Well, that's like me. I didn't get involved in Scientology until I was 14.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
So you had
exactly.
some,
and I had,
So as a baby,
formal education through high school. Yeah.
So as a baby, what we were experiencing, and nobody ever talks about this. This is the first time it's probably ever been talked about. Jeffrey Augustine and I talked about it a little bit, but I'm going to say something that I kind of never said before. And that is, as young children, as a baby through 7, what we were experiencing was something more like chattel slavery in America. They stripped us of our history. We had no ability. We had no education. We didn't have a past. And we had no sense of place. We were completely stripped of any sense of like physical place and past. So we were blank slates, and we were being forced to work.
The kids were Dev T.
Okay, yeah, So we were being forced to work, and we were basically being penned like livestock as future labor. And it's all about economics. Like, people have to understand, America is built on this economic system of chattel slavery. We had all this land here, and we didn't have anybody to work it because the indigenous people wouldn't work. They wouldn't be slaves. They would rather die. So there was a labor excess in sub-Saharan Africa. I studied this in college. I partly studied African economic history in London. And we brought these people over, and we built the most successful country in the history of the human race economically. And we did it through this chattel slavery. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been affordable. Okay. And the use of children and then adults, teenagers and then adults, but obviously the closest thing to a chattel slave was the children, because they'd been slipped of past and slipped of all identity. We were the only people, the children, that had zero past and zero identity. So we were closer to a black chattel slave, which is purely an economic system. And that's had a special effect on our minds, and no one talks about it. None of the other channels talk about it. And all the 18-year-old kids that built it in the 70s and 80s or 60s, they want to act like we're the same. Nope. There's nothing about you that is like me. There's nothing about you that had no past, no education, stripped of my history, and stripped of any sense of place or geography. So until you have that, you experience a sense of nothing, total void, shrouded. You have no idea what slavery is. And one of the things that I'm most proud of about Child X, which has been winning literary awards, is the top genealogy and middle passage slavery lineage association in the United States. The Sons and Daughters of the U.S. Middle Passage gave Child X their highest award. I couldn't believe it. I got a slavery award from a U.S. slavery organization. And why that's so important to me is it's one of the most prestigious literary awards I've ever won, because Pulitzer Prize winners have won it, like Isabel Wilkinson and Nicole Hannah-Jones. Maya Angelou won it. Gordon Parks won it. And why I'm so proud of it, Vincent Brown, who is a Harvard professor that won the Ainsfield Worth, which is the Black Pulitzer, he won it. And why I'm so proud of it is a esteemed slavery lineage society is basically validating my childhood as a form of chattel slavery. And it makes me want to cry, because I feel like it's finally there's an institutional validation for my enslavement and child torture. And I do believe that I was tortured throughout my childhood.
Right.
I was going to say, to add to what you said, Jamie, my understanding is, because we've been gone 36 years, is that Scientology and the Sea Org is shrinking, but that the people that are joining or that are in the Sea Org are the children of Scientologists. In other words, like been groomed. They've been groomed and moved up, and that's what the Sea Org is now. Is that those people? They're not getting people off the street who are joining, because
it's interesting. It's interesting. Yeah, sorry. I wanted to say one thing, and it was interesting that you say that, Mark. I just saw this TED talk that talked about how it was a TED talk basically saying that grooming is abuse, and they broke down the anatomy of a grooming, and they basically said grooming is first love bombing, making you feel like you're special or important, which they always do when you walk in. And they also did to us kids on some level by making us say we're coming back from past lives. We're going to move. We're getting to get in spaceships and go to other planets and save those planets. Like, they made us feel like we were special. Then they isolate you. And then they use fear to keep you there. So grooming, by definition, according to this psychologist who was doing this talk, love bombing, isolation, fear. And her whole argument was that grooming is abuse. And if you look at what they call the training routines, or the training drills, which are to make you not react. Well, if you're doing 5 years old, or you're 25 years old, and you're doing this thing called bull bait, where people are supposed to like make fun of you, scream at you, make you try to react, and you don't react. Okay, and you're doing this. Yeah, you don't react to negative things that happen in the environment. But what it also does, it makes you not react. It turns off your empathy. And right after you do that, they're training you to not have empathy. Right after you do that, you do this thing called the objectives. Which is you being controlled for hundreds of hours by another person, just practicing being controlled. Move your body here, touch that, move over here. Hundreds of hours of it. And they say it's going to make you separate yourself from your active mind. But really what they're doing is they're conditioning you to be controlled at 5 years old, like a slave, like a robot. You question nothing. You just move. These are the first things you do when you enter Scientology. The TR, they call it the training routines, and the objectives. The objectives is this drill where they practice being controlled for dozens, if not hundreds of hours. The effect of that on a 5-year-old brain, I talked to a neuroscientist about that, where you have no meta-intelligence, is far severe, but that's also incredibly effective and incredibly damaging to an adult human.
Well, I was going to say they also do it to adults too. And as a matter of fact, that was Miscavige's. I understand that it was his sort of hobby horse of just like, they got to do 1,000 hours of objectives. You know what I mean? Before they can do OT.
I wonder why? Because they're malleable and controllable, right? So people don't talk about these things. I was talking to a member who had really lost a lot, and I don't want to say who they are, but a friend of Janis's. And, we had gotten into a little bit of a disagreement, and I was talking about the child abuse. And this person said to me, I said, no one talks about the child abuse. And this person said to me, what are you talking about? You're not on Reddit. You're not on Discord. You don't read. They talk about the molestations, and they talked about, the living conditions. And I said, I don't think you have any concept of what I think is child abuse, what I think was done to me. And I don't really think you understand what it was like to experience this thing as a kid. When I'm talking about child abuse, I'm talking about the objectives. I'm talking about them putting me in a room and forcing me to practice being controlled for hundreds of hours. I'm talking about me being forced to sit facing another person and not blink for 2 hours, or they would fail me and I couldn't pass. What's happening when I'm not blinking and you're 5 years old? When I started doing no blink training routines, is my body gets furiously uncomfortable and my eyes are burning at 5 years old, but I can't move or flinch or blink. So they're training me at 5 or 7 years old to deny the body, to get used to my body being brutally uncomfortable and to not pay attention to it. They're conditioning me to endure physical abuse. So when the physical abuse got turned up as I got older, I was used to it. No one talks about that. That's the real abuse. The telling a 5-year-old boy or girl or a 3-year-old boy or girl that anything bad that ever happens to them, they pulled it in, they caused it. Like, right. Children already think everything is their fault. You want to create someone that's going to for sure become a drug addict and unalive themselves. Tell them when they're 3 years old that every negative thing happening to them that's completely random and out of their control, they're actually being aggressively abused by this organization. Then they're being told that they're causing it. Let's do that to an adult for 6 months and see how mentally they are after it. Then let's talk about what that might do to a 5-year-old with no meta intelligence. Yeah. No one talks about the true abuse that was done to these children. And that's why I wrote this book. And that's why I have these conversations. I want the conversation to go to what we should actually be talking about. Okay. And Xenu and all this stuff about how weird Dave is and all the cute stuff that happens at the int base. Like it doesn't matter. You can believe whatever you want. What matters is this level of harm that was systematically done to thousands of children over 30 years on 4 continents: Johannesburg, South Africa, Mexico City, Central Florida, Southern England, Los Angeles, California, Sydney, Australia. This was a system where children were systematically enslaved and had their brains carved out with ice picks every single day, living in animal conditions. One of the things journalists always ask me is, that animal condition thing is hard to believe. Why would they even do that? It sounds like it would cost them money to treat you like animals. It doesn't even make any sense. Well, that was the point of view. I mean, Janis says we were Dev T. Dev T in Hubbardism means extra work, like something that was just a burden, they like create inefficiency, something extra that shouldn't have had to be
distraction.
done. Distraction.
There was a lot of neglect because the children got in the way of achieving the purpose of getting your job done.
True. So there's even a policy that Jeffrey Augustine, maybe I sent it to him, but there's a policy that says that any staff that was written, that any staff member, and I think that, Mike Rinder was the head of OSA when this came down. Okay. That any staff member, that had kids in the nursery, had an extra economic burden on the organization and were expected to do 1/3 more work than all the other staff members.
Oh, I've not heard that.
No, it's a policy letter.
It must have been after we left.
I'll send it to you. Jeffrey Augustine calls it, it was in the 70s. Jeffrey Augustine called it, we were useless eaters. So why would you go to so much trouble to treat children like that? And the answer is, and Janis kind of said it, we were distraction from the labor. So because we couldn't contribute labor yet, they basically saw us like baby piglets, and we're going to wait till they're 12, and then we're going to put them to work. But until they're 12, we're just going to put them off in a pig pen. And you know what? They raised us like animals and pigs. And when our dorms got dirty, because we would be, 30 kids in a small dormitory, bunk stack, 3 high, okay, in a slum. And when it got disgusting, because they didn't teach us how to clean, they weren't raising us with any sort of values or understanding of how to organize our lives. So these places got really disgusting. A bunch of kids walking around. You know what they would do? They would put a sign on the door saying pigs. Well, I say pigs birthing. In the book, I call it pigs room. Yeah. I don't want to use English, but it was basically say pigs room. Like, now we're raising you like pigs, and now we're labeling you pigs. I know after the people watching it sounds crazy, but anybody that grew up with me there, and there's tons of us, they all were in pigs birthing. They were all in pigs rooms as they raised us like pigs, and then they told us we were pigs.
Well, that's maybe I got a wrong impression somewhere when I was in there, but I thought that the parents were supposed to, at nighttime when they got off work, they were supposed to go pick up their child and take them home with them,
No.
and the child stays with them.
No. I mean, there were random times where I would be in an apartment with my mother. I mean, that happened at times, 6 months here, a year there, but that was the minority. You know, when I was 7 years old, my mother had a child, and she went off to Florida for a year and a half, and I didn't see her again until I was 8.5 years old. And somebody got me from the Fountain Building and brought me to what's called the Rehabilitation Project Force, where she was in a concentration camp wearing black with an armband right out of Auschwitz and Dachau, right? And I didn't even know she was back from Florida. I didn't see my mother in a year and a half. No, we grew up in dormitories. I don't even call it the cadet order because it's a lie. This was an orphanage. We grew up in orphanages. And
is your mother still in Scientology?
I believe so. I have heard she was sick and that she had a really severe form of cancer. So I don't even know that she's around. But knowing my mother, she's like a cockroach. I wouldn't be surprised if she's still alive. But you know, and when I say that, I'm not trying to be disparaging to her.
Well, and I want to get. I know I believe everything that you're saying. I wanted to ask you though, because we're running short on time, but I wanted to ask you, how did you get out of this? Because obviously you left when you were 18.
So I went back in at 17, and they were launching the Free Winds, and I was in the Free Winds org. I was on the maiden voyage. I was basically, I was probably trafficked there right before my 18th birthday.
I don't remember you. I was on the maiden
Janis
voyage.
was there.
I was washing dishes for an Australian that you knew, some guy, Peter something.
Okay.
I
was on the mission. I was the mission in charge.
I didn't know that.
To pull off the maiden voyage. I heard about every one of those musters.
Okay, so no, I was on the maiden voyage working as a busboy, but mostly as a dishwasher. And then I left, and then I got sent as an advanced person. So the ship sent me around the world to promote the ship. I went to Canada, which was horrible. But I was very successful at filling events. And then they sent me when I got kicked out of Canada, they sent me to England to raise funds for the ship in England. And I raised money there, and I sent all the money that I raised for the levels that you do on the Free Winds. I sent all that money to a bank every week into Credit Bank Luxembourg. After a year in England, they brought me back to Florida, where I worked with Charmaine DeKivett, who it was the greatest fundraiser in the history of the Scientology or the Hubbard movement. And I worked as her second, and her administrator, and then her second. So I had this real close-up view of the way that funds were extracted from the successful and wealthy people of this movement at the highest level. And that was,
donations.
It was there I left. I mean, they call it blown. I didn't blow. I escaped. Okay. And what happened was,
I did.
They were forced. I thought we were extracting money from people in ways that were dishonest. And some of them blew up at our faces. And because Charmaine was so valuable as a fundraiser, they couldn't take her off the job. So if the office got in trouble, somebody had to be punished. And I just want to give my escape story real quick. Okay, part of it. I'm not going to give the full escape story because the full escape story is in the book, but I'm going to give you why I escaped. So they sent me to the ship. I'm 18 years old. I'm flying into Aruba, and all the other people flying into Aruba, they're on vacation. They're drinking margaritas. It's like festive, and I know that I have hell waiting for me. And I get there, and a woman named Jenny, I can't think of her last name. She was the head of no, not Jenny Linson. It was a different Jenny, but I knew Jenny Linson. But she was the CEO. I don't want to use the terms, but she was the highest messenger, which is like this kind of legacy executive.
Oh, Jenny Rosdick. She was married to Ludwig.
Yeah. Very pretty girl, married to Ludwig, who was the port captain. And she was waiting for me with a bucket and a torn jumpsuit and a mop. And she was screaming at me as I came up the game plank, calling me a piece of shit and a motherfucker and all this stuff. And then I was put down into the bilge with the head of the engine room, which is one of the Alcock brothers. And
Wick.
I don't want to name them. You guys name them. No, Wick
Alcock, right? Was it
Wick? No, it was Wack. It was
Wack. Okay.
Richard Alcock, the older brother.
Right. Okay, but I worked with both those guys. But this guy was the more stocky one. The other one was Hubbard's purchaser. This was not the purchaser. This was the other guy. He ran the engine room. And the first thing he did is put me in the deepest, darkest bilge. And so I was just covered in oil. Couldn't even see my body. I do some things in there, but I don't want to say it. You got to read the book. But at one point, 2.5 hours later, I'm in this motor oil under the engine, and Jenny Rostig or whatever comes down. And Whack or Wick or one of those guys, he's like, oh, he's in there. You can't see him. And she's like, good. Right. So I was in there for 2 weeks, and it was so hot and the work was so grueling that I passed out from heat prostration, and I ended up in the infirmary for a week. Then they put me back in there, and I couldn't do things good enough for him to get me out of there. And finally, Wick or Whack or one of those guys, he says to me, Whack, he says, do you have an eyesight problem, Jamie? Because you seem to work pretty hard, but you always have an overt product. You always do a bad job. And it makes me think that you can't see what you're doing. And I said, but I never had glasses, right? So I said, yeah, I have bad eyesight and I don't have glasses because I grew up with neglect. And then he started shaking his head, and he looked ashamed because he realized I literally couldn't see the oil. And he goes, I'm graduating you out of here. And he sent me up, and I went to Potland just to scrub all the pots for the staff galley. And I was looking out through a portal, and I'd been suffering. And I just kept staring at the ocean. I think we went to St. Martin's or something, and I was staring at the blue ocean. And I told myself, I will never come back here again. I feel like a slave. If they ever try to make me come back here again, I will escape. A couple months later, they asked me to do something that I thought was pretty criminal. Whether it was criminal under statute, doesn't matter. It was criminal behavior. And I didn't want to do it. And I said, no. I was ordered to do it anyway by my boss, and I did it. And it created a very bad reaction. And we worked all night back then, so I was up till 2 a.m. It got way worse when Debbie Cook took over as the head human trafficker. It became more of a human trafficking organization when Debbie Cook took over for Ron Norton. He was a little kinder. She was walking around in this full Class A uniform, and it became very much about, we're going to kill you, right. It became very brutalist under Debbie. So if you think Debbie Cook was a victim, she was not. She was. Are
you talking about on the ship or at the Clearwater?
I was basically, I was posted. I was posted in Clearwater, but I was on the ship being punished. So I said, I'll never come back here. And then Debbie took over. And so the conditions on the base, which I was a little bit immune to, got way worse because Debbie was draconian. And it became really a human trafficking organization under her watch. And she needs to be held accountable for that. So when you see videos of her being this old lady that was hurt, I'm sure she was, but she did some things. And anybody that worked under her, they can say in the comments how they treated her and what kind of person she was for decades. So I'm not making that up. People were there, and they can testify to it, or they can say I'm full of it. They will not say I'm full of it. That was a human trafficking organization. It became that way even far, far worse under her. She trafficked children, and even by, you could say, Tom DeVocht, who was a great guy, very nice. Technically, he was over 18 and running these kids. Technically, he was trafficking children. Now you could say,
well, you got to remember, he started younger and was.
I understand. He's a great guy. I don't know him, but I've only seen that guy to be a great guy. But he still did it, and he needs to be accountable for it. The same way I need to be accountable for any stuff that I did on the financials when I was 18. Okay.
So did you finally leave from Clearwater, or what did you?
Yeah. So I get back. They asked me to do something. Criminal. I don't know if it's criminal by statute. I didn't want to do it. They kind of forced me.
But in your mind, it was criminal.
Yeah. And I want to talk. And I think I'm going to talk about that with Jeffrey, because Jeffrey has that kind of Scientology, the money project thing, and I want to talk about the money stuff very specifically with him because it's so intricate. But it exploded because I did that. A guy kind of went crazy, and it blew up. Okay, and we worked all night. So I went home at 6 o'clock in the morning. We'd been calling Australia and Europe all night. And at 9 o'clock in the morning, I get a knock on my door from my boss. And he says, pack your stuff. You're going back to the Free Winds for, I guess they called it, they not enhancement, but what did they call it when they were like fixing you, not rehabilitation. There was a word for fixing someone through labor and courses and
the RPF.
No, it wasn't the RPF. It was Dex. and it was hard labor.
Well, they had was it officer training? Because I
No. It was just interrogations mostly and hard labor. So you're going back to the ship for hard labor. And
you mean brainwashing?
No, but there was a term for like if they pulled you off the job to do hard labor and to go on to be on course to give you a break. They had a term for that. It was like a funny term. I can't think of it. So he said I had 2 hours, and I don't want to tell you how I did it, but in that moment, I did what looks like it's right out of a John le Carre movie. What happens after that guy leaves is I told myself I'm not going back to that ship. And I mean, I passed out at 18 and 19 years old to heat prostration. Like, I'm not going back into that. And so after he left, what happens next is a John le Carre novel, which is in the book. And that was
just, we all have our escape stories, our leaving stories, and they're all similar. I mean, mine was definitely a John le Carre, Robert Ludlum story.
Okay, all right. So you get it. And
Janis wants to do a book about everybody's escape stories because they're all individual and they're all interesting,
I've got some stories for that.
Okay. Well, I really hope that Jeffrey asked me to do a kind of financial one because I'd like to talk about it. I'd like to talk about the stuff that I was involved in. Yeah. And I'd like to be accountable for it and take responsibility for it. Even though I was all I ever knew, I'm still accountable for what I did. Okay.
I wanted to make a comment about what you talked about being down in the bilges on the free winds. Okay. Mm-hmm. I never went to the free winds, and literally Janis and we left in 1990, like a year after or whatever you're there. But I'll never forget Miscavige coming back, and he was so proud of the fact that they set up this officer training program where people would go down in the bilges and clean the bilges, and then they'd have to get on this widow's bench or whatever to go over the side of the ship to learn all this stuff. He had the whole cine crew do the thing, and that's what he was talking. Because I
remember it. I remember they were sending guys,
and they. To be honest with you, I have friends that are no longer in that were in there. They said that would like being on the ship and cleaning it. They go, oh, it was so much better than being up here at the base under Miscavige, right?
Janis,
that became his punishment. He used to send like Rinder and Heber and all the executives when they were doing free winds events. He'd make them go down in the bilge and scrub it down there. It was so hot and filthy and disgusting.
Janis, you should tell people what the bilges are. And by the way, I also have this graphic novel that I did. I'm not trying to sell stuff, but I did have this graphic novel that I did, which is a sci-fi. I wrote this before Child X. I just wanted to talk about it for a second because I didn't ever think I was going to write that book. So I wrote my childhood as a sci-fi graphic novel with like aliens and everything in it. But it's kind of like, it's all the same places, but just like a slightly weird universe. So, but it was after that I faced enough of it that I think it was like a bridge, and it helped me to get me to the point where I would write Child X. But I just wanted people to know that I wrote this graphic novel that is based on my childhood. They came out within a few months of each other. A different publisher picked it up. And I just wanted people to know that exists. Hopefully, Mark, you'll put it in the comments. And then, Janis, I was really hoping that you would tell people what the bilges are, or one of you would.
Jamie, is it available at Amazon?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. And if you could put the link in the comments, I just want people to know that there's another version of it. Like some people read Child X, and I'll get an email going, it's heavy. It's a heavy set. It's dark. Yeah. It's a lot of trauma on a very small boy. And so if you want to read it as an adventure story, and then maybe the gradient is to I can't believe I just said gradient. See what you guys are doing to me. But maybe another way to read the story is Hybrid, the graphic novel, which is I illustrated it, and it's a series of paintings that I made with an artist in Italy, and they're just really kind of staggeringly beautiful images. Correct. They're all. It's almost like a story told through 80 paintings, and you get this really. I want to show you guys one image that I'm really proud of in this book. I want to see you guys see that. Oh, that's a really cool image. This is like the Vatos that I grew up with in LA. Okay. Yeah. So I want people to understand that I'm a conceptual artist. I do a lot of visual art in my job. So if you want to know what my visual art looks like, it's in this book. Because I get emails and people ask sometimes like, Well, what does Jamie's visual art look like? It's in Hybrid, the book. You can see my visual art. Okay.
Janis
But
Bilges.
yeah.
But the bilges is basically where all the sludge goes. On a ship, you have oil tanks and you have water tanks and, the different tanks to hold different things. But the sludge from that all goes into the bilges, and that has to be cleaned out.
Did people do that on the Apollo when you were with Hubbard?
Yes.
Did you have to go down there? Yeah.
No, I didn't, but I did have message runs to different people who were on the bilge brigade.
Wow.
And they were down, they were just covered in grudge. Oh, it's disgusting. And they would come out on break so that they could breathe, but they were the people who were in trouble. And what this shows, Jamie, is in Scientology, where you're supposed to make the world's going to go free and you're supposed to have freedom, it's not freedom. It is controlling. Everybody is being controlled, that they have no decisions of their own. And that's why I left when I did, because I felt my freedom was slowly being impinged upon and taken away with all these different rules. And you had no say. And, oh, you go over here and your husband goes over here, or you need to divorce this person. That actually started after we left. But it's like a slavery where you have no say on your own life anymore, and you are controlled.
Plus, Janis, you were pregnant too. You were pregnant. You were going to have a kid.
Yes, I was pregnant. That was like the icing on the top that pushed me over the edge. I'm pregnant. This is my way out. And I didn't tell anyone because I knew I'd be pulled in and mentally brainwashed until I would agree to an abortion.
I tell you, I did love my year or however long I was in England. Even though I was raising money and doing bad stuff, that year at that compound in England is so beautiful. And because it was so far away from the center of everything that runs it, it was a lot more lax.
Yes.
And you're in this beautiful, one of the most beautiful.
St. Hill?
Yeah, it's
St.
so
Hill
beautiful there.
Yeah.
And it was less harsh. And some of my friends from LA were there. And I hate to say it, I was doing bad things. I was raising money for all this bullshit. But I have very fond memories of my time in Southern England at that compound, even though I was being trafficked. Right. It's very strange. Yeah, but I want to make sure I make 2 points before we leave, because I don't want no one.
Okay.
What I want to say is what I've tried to talk about here is that what was done to the kids is not talked about. What the objectives, and a neuroscientist or a child psychologist or psychiatrist should weigh in on this. Okay. What do these practices of that hundreds of hour grooming or being told everything's your fault do to the child mind? No one talks about it. People, I would urge everyone, I beg you to please get interested in what was psychically done to these kids and then also physiologically done to these kids. Please get interested, because we lose a lot of non-paramilitary kids too, because the same psychic drills of the control of the grooming of the hundreds of hours of control, where you practice being controlled, moved around a room, touch that, and all you do is practice complying for hundreds of hours. You're still being told, if you're a non-paramilitary kid, that everything's your fault, that you caused everything bad to ever happen to you or anyone around you. Please get interested in what was physically and mentally done to these children and what these processes might mean for these children. I would like people to get interested in this. And I would like this to become a form of interest and discussion, so we can begin to have an understanding of what was done to these children, because we aren't faring very well, most of us. And I still have done better than a lot, but I have so many scars and so many broken and shameful and bad things about myself, because I'm damaged. And people see me in terms of the things that I've done, but I just want people to know that I have had the S kicked out of me, and I feel that way inside. It doesn't mean I don't feel awesome too, but right. I mean, I'm not better. Okay. Like, I'm doing better. And then the last thing I want to say was when I left, I went, there's a happy ending to this story. And when I left, not being able to write at 19, 20 years old, I went from not being able to write at 20 years old, X's and scratches, I mean, my grandmother spent 45 minutes, I talk about it in the book, like trying to explain to me how to use a comma, and I couldn't get it. To 5 years later, graduating from the top 10 most elite universities on earth called the London School of Economics, which in Europe is equivalent to Harvard or Yale. Okay. So I had to compete, not being able to write, with the smartest kids in the world, because only the smartest kids get into that school, with a 15-year head start. And that was an impossible thing to do. And I explain in the book how I did it, like physically, how did I hack that system? And that was really comes down to why I wrote the book, because adult illiteracy is not for the faint of heart. And I was able to come out of that. So I really didn't write Child X as an ex-member book. I really wrote Child X because I wanted to show people that they could be in the darkest place of humanity where there is no road out, and maybe still find a road out, or definitely still find a road out. And I explain brick by brick how that impossibility occurred. And so there's two reasons I wanted to say that. I want people to see what I went through physically and understand the scars, but I also want people to understand that there is a happy ending there. And there's a happy ending there. Right? So I want people to know that it's not all that if you can make it through, like the book gets less and less more optimistic, and it shows you how I climbed out of the abyss physically, and then I'm still climbing out of the abyss mentally. I'm not free of it.
Right.
No.
Well, we're enjoying the book right now, and it's available on Amazon.com, Child X by Jamie Mustard, so you can order it there. And then his other book, the graphic novel that he just mentioned, Hybrid, is also available there on Amazon. So just click on, there'll be links in the video description below. If you can go, it'll take you directly to the Amazon page, and you can order the books there.
Over to Janis, which is that is the most amazing photograph ever. Like whenever I see these photographs,
it is an amazing photo
with young you with Hubbard. They're chilling to me. That photograph is chilling. Anyway, I just want to say those photographs are unbelievable, Janis. Okay, they are like.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I know. I look at my flood pants.
A waif. She looks like a waif.
Oh my God!
And that's what Hubbard used to call me. He used to call me a little waif.
Wow.
But Jamie, I want to say I still don't know where the comma's supposed to go.
All right, thank you.
Well, here is Janis's book is also available on Amazon. Also, go down to our merchandise store. You can get an autograph copy. She'll personally autograph it for you. But anyway, this is Commodore's Messenger Book 1, and this is Commodore's Messenger Book 2.
And that's you again, Janis.
Yes.
Yes.
What's he saying to you?
He's not talking to me.
Oh, he's not. Okay.
No, he's talking to the Portuguese chandler. We were in Setúbal. The chandler was the person who gets supplies for the ship.
But when he did talk to you, Janis, what kind of things would he say?
Well, he called me a little waif.
Did you have love for him? Did you feel like a bond? Was he a father to you?
Yeah, yes, he was a father figure to me.
Yes.
My dad left when I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
You know?
How old are you? How old are you here?
Probably 16, 17.
My God.
And
Wow.
she was 13.
Yeah.
And went all the way through. Like I said, she spent
12.
Go ahead. Okay, 12. But she spent 6 hours a day, 7 days a week on watch with Hubbard, with the other messengers. But she and a couple others were the closest ones to him for years. And so, I mean, her story is amazing. It's got photographs, both books, and you can order them on Amazon. Or if you want an autographed copy, our merch store down below, just click on that. She'll autograph it and put personal messages in it.
Do you still have feelings of affection for him, Janis? Like when you think back, or is it more turned to anger?
No, I don't have anger about it. I don't have regrets over it. There are things I look at that were wrong. Everything was his way. My own emotions were ignored or withheld. I had to suppress a lot of that growing up in how I did. When my kids were 11, I looked at him and I'm like, what were my parents thinking? Because I was 11 years old. I ended up on the ship with no parents.
Yeah. It's funny. You get older and you start seeing, like I'll meet a kid, or like my friends will have a kid and they'll be the age that I was when I was trafficked to the Free Winds.
Right.
And they're like a baby.
Yeah.
And I think about,
Yeah.
oh my God, they were doing that to me and I was that age. And then you start to reframe it. And, you know, and then you start to go, how am I still here? And one of the reasons I wrote that Child X is because I wanted people to understand step by step why I'm still here, how I did it.
Right.
Because I think I don't know. I think I wanted to map it because I thought maybe other people could understand it. But I think your experience, I gotta get your books. I gotta get
it's
your
unique.
books. Yeah.
It's unique.
Yeah. But Jamie, bravo to you that you're still here and that you're fighting.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I just think of like, even when you look at like Neil Gaiman, who came the generation before us, you know, like I was reading this article on him and his wife at the time was saying that whenever he was asked about it, he would go into like the fetal position and start crying. And people don't know this about Neil Gaiman, but he was the ED of Birmingham Org. And so the Sea Org wasn't started until the paramilitary at St. Hill in Southern England by Hubbard at his home there until Neil was probably 8 or 9. And so what happened to Neil that he was so traumatized, because if there was an equivalent of Avant Gents in England, it was Neil Gaiman's father, David Gaiman. You know, he was a beloved guy. I mean, you know, but also a guy that was, you know, committed some crime. He was an unindicted co-conspirator operating. I mean, I talk about meeting Neil Gaiman's father a few times in the book, and what an incredible presence he was. He was just he was very kind to me, and just the presence of David Gaiman, he kind of reminded me of like the English Avant. So I don't know. Yeah. Anyway. So I'm fascinated by that time on the Apollo, and I'm fascinated by that time on the Apollo, and I do. And when you read and one of the reasons, and I know you got to go, Mark, but like in terms of my family history and my past and my father, when you find out the truth of that in my book, it traces back to the Apollo. Some people that you would have known, Janis, and so it's very chilling for me to see your book covers, and I'm afraid to read your books. I'm afraid to read your books because that's where my life started, and I'm afraid that I'm literally afraid if I read your book, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown.
Yeah. Well, you can flip through it and look at the pictures.
You don't have to. Yeah, you can look at the pictures. You don't have to read it.
Okay, but I do think it's time maybe that I think it's time that I got your books and I start to understand my origins a little better.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, it could either be engrammic or it could give you relief.
Okay. I'm telling people that what occurred on that time where you were there and the experience you had is one of the most unique and powerful pieces of American religious history. You had a bird's eye view to what people in 500 years will be studying as American religious history. And it's just incredible to talk to you and to have this. And then Mark was there with Dave, and to just kind of have this cross-generational exchange of ideas. It's incredibly powerful for me. And I just want to thank you guys for, having me on and wanting to talk to me. It's been, a really powerful experience for me.
One other thing I wanted to mention is please subscribe to our channel, hit that like button and notification button. Why do I say that after we just talked about these books? Because Janis and I have interviewed over 300 hours or 400 interviews on our channel, Scientology Peeling the Onion, including L. Ron Hubbard's personal communicator, L. Ron Hubbard's personal auditor. I mean, his stewards, people that knew Miscavige, and all these different people, and they all have stories to tell. And we also have stories of abuse, people who were abused, Amber Strawn, Danielle Chamberlain. Now we have Jamie on here.
Yeah, me.
So we tell it all on our channel. So subscribe and go back. I have playlists where I have the people's interviews together. We have Larry Wallersheim on there, the guy who sued Scientology and finally got $9 million after 30-something years. So anyway, we've done a lot of interviews. So subscribe. I think you'll really enjoy watching these things. If you don't have time to read, you can at least watch them or listen to them on your headphones.
Yeah, very good, Mark.
Also, Also, questions or comments. Last time we got over 100 comments and questions. Please go down below. We will answer them, and we will, Jamie will read them too, and we will have Jamie back again, I'm sure. So if you have any questions or comments, please go down below there. Do either one of you have anything last thing you want to say before we end the show?
No, it was a fascinating conversation, and thank you guys for going down the rabbit hole with me.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
we enjoyed it very much.
I did too.
Okay, everybody. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.